The All-Ireland quarter-final lineup has been finalised and we are set for some cracking games in Croke Park this coming weekend. Derry's reward for beating Mayo in a dramatic penalty shootout on Saturday night in Castlebar is a clash against Kerry, while Dublin will take on Galway after Padraig Joyce's men saw off Monaghan in Pearse Stadium. Meanwhile, Roscommon take on Armagh after they sprung an upset against Tyrone in Healy Park, while Louth will play in the quarter-finals for the first time ever and they will take on Jim McGuinness's Donegal team. So we have plenty to discuss on today's episode of the Tyrone Football Podcast. Will Slattery here with you. Delighted to be joined by Dick Clerkin and Frank Roach for our chat today. And Dick, we'll obviously look ahead to the quarterfinals and some of the good games I mentioned there as we go. But let's just maybe reflect first on what was a very dramatic game in Castlebar on Saturday night. Derry just about getting over the line against Mayo, who once again will rue their inability to close out a game in which they were leading heading into injury time. How do you reflect on what you saw from both teams on Saturday?
Yeah, I know much will be made about, there's already been spoken about them not being able to close the game out, Will, but when you look at the game as a whole, really the first half or lack thereof was what cost them that. When you see how they were able to sort of perform in the second half, it was much more Mayo-like. But I just filed the column this morning and the stat that jumped out at me, they scored 1 point from play in the first half, and that was from their centre half back, Sam Callanan. Like, that's just not good enough. And I know everyone's sort of saying Mayo are done by, unlucky in closing out games. Like Mayo, for all the big performances and wins they've had, the one cornerstone to that is intensity and work rate and pressure around the middle third, and not letting their opponents sort of dominate possession, be it Kerry, be it Dublin. But then on Saturday evening against Derry, for some reason, maybe it was fatigue, maybe it was complacency, maybe it was tactical, I don't know. They stood off Derry, let Derry, who were fragile, who were there to be taken out, grow into the game, get confidence, rack up scores, find a bit of form that had deserted them, and next thing, they were 6-3 down, not in the game. And yes, they bounced back well, and they did. They still could have won it, but that first half, like 1 point from play, nobody from position 8 up getting a score. That's not good enough. You can't really have too many complaints as a team and at home, in ideal conditions, and that's just not good enough. And I think ultimately they'll rue that, because they should have been winning that game, I think.
And Frank, from a Derry perspective, if say the league final against Dublin was them maybe playing at their best, and we've seen them probably at their worst on a couple of occasions throughout this championship, where does Saturday night's performance rank on that scale, do you think? How close are they to maybe rediscovering the form that had them in the kind of bracket as an All-Ireland contender?
I'd say they're somewhere around about 60%. They're definitely not back to where they were, but you've been able to see a kind of gradual step-up improvement from, I'd say, the nadir, the low point for them, I thought, was definitely the Armagh game, even more so than the Donegal game in Ulster. There was an element of freakishness about the way they conceded all the goals. But like against Armagh, they were terrible. They looked a beaten docket at that stage. And they were very vulnerable against Westmeath and managed to kind of sneak through that day. And I think they were helped. You could see how they set up in the first half on Saturday evening. I mean, they tended to retreat the 15 behind the 45. They weren't initially engaging Mayo. They were basically telling Mayo, "You work your way through this," and that has been a weakness, I think, for Mayo for a number of years. They just struggled to deal with that kind of blanket defence, and Derry got most things bang on defensively in that first half, but they were facilitated by some terrible sloppiness by Mayo, mishandling, overhit passes going over for a wide, I think, from Owen McLaughlin. Darren McHale had mishit an attempted foot pass at one stage that went straight to Ethan Doherty. And more often than not, maybe there were scores coming at the far end from this. And even though McGuigan hasn't been really at his best in the last few games, although he did come good eventually on Saturday evening, that someone like Lachlan Murray, who was brilliant in the first half, like some of the points he scored, and it, taking the ball on the loop, coming in from the left wing and trusting himself, and for whatever reason, Mayo just didn't do that in the first half. and Derry were well worth their 3-point lead at half-time. But it just shows you that they're not quite back to where they are. In the space of 10 minutes after half-time, suddenly that lead was gone and they were trailing. And they were trailing again when the penalty went in. But they hung in there. And that win, I think, will do an awful lot more for Derry than the win against Westmeath the week before. The flip side is they've only a week to recover from an absolutely, savage shift they had to put in on Saturday evening, and now they're playing Kerry. But it's once again, I mean, Derry v Mayo was the tie of the round. Kerry v Derry, I think, is the tie of the round this weekend.
Yeah, Dick, do you think if Derry improved, sufficiently to beat Mayo, albeit after penalties, is there another step in them, do you think, going into this weekend? Can they get closer to that kind of National League form, do you think?
Well, I think the dressing room, the energy, the narrative has shifted. And, as a player, I remember times when it was nothing to do with physical exertions or training or games played. Just the mentality of where you're at individually and as a team can have a massive impact on the energy levels that you bring to the pitch. So that's all shifted now positively towards Derry, whereas there for the last 3 or 4 weeks, it was just this weight on top of them. So nobody's talking about, Mickey Hart. Everyone will be talking, the conversation with Mickey Hart this week. If there's any man who can go up to Croke Park and turn over a Kerry team, who is it? It's Mickey Hart. That's what Derry brought Mickey Hart in to do for games like this. So that'll give energy back to these players. And you could make the argument how they were that poor against Armagh, Westmeath, how much energy, it definitely was a slog against Castlebar. So a lot of these players, some of them have been suspended. And, so I think when you add the ball up, they mightn't have just, exerted as much as some other teams might have done through if they had a real slog through their group, because they were that pathetic in many games. So you're seeing one noticeable upturn for them was the form and the influence of Brendan Rodgers and Conor Glass, who, up until things started to turn against them, were the informed midfield or the best midfield pair in the country. And when they lost that foothold, when they lost that sort of, real sort of control around the middle, the rest of the team sort of floundered. They got that back in Castlebar on Saturday night. And you could see, even the highlights, every highlight that popped up, it was Conor Glass on the ball, again, been in the right position. It was Brendan Rodgers pushing forward, kicking points. That's massive. Those boys were probably a wee bit down on themselves because they've been so good. They're back, and good players can have such a massive impact, not just on what they can bring individually, but other players around them. So, getting those two players back on form, and as I said a couple of times this year, I think Kerry's weakest point is their midfield. So if those players are coming up to Croke Park with, a second wind almost, there's a very good chance that they'll be able to dominate that middle third. Now, whether they'll have enough around them, that remains to be seen. But that of anywhere else on the pitch, the fact that the two boys showed the form that they did on Saturday night, that's a massive feather in Derry's cap going down to Croke Park this weekend.
Yeah, and Frank, you say, it's the tie of the round from your perspective. How do you look at it? Two very contrasting routes to this stage. Derry, as we mentioned, have suffered 3 heavy defeats in the Championship. Lots of questions over the form of key men. Kerry, I think they're the only team still with a 100% record, but haven't been tested at all. Have had a very kind of soft run. Is this a good draw for Kerry in the sense that they're finally getting that test, or is it the bad draw in that they're actually getting a team who maybe are rediscovering themselves? How are you kind of looking at it from that perspective?
My own suspicion is maybe Jack O'Connor would have liked it, I won't say a little bit easier, but Derry, and I'm not going to say that Derry will spook them either, but there's an uncertainty about this fixture that maybe Kerry wouldn't have had, if they were going in against, for argument's sake, Roscommon, because Derry very nearly spooked them last July. We've got to remember that All-Ireland semi-final, how close it was to defeat for Kerry. I mean, Derry, they had kind of one hand or two hands nearly almost on the Kerry neck with 10 minutes to go, and they kind of relinquished their grip. The other thing is, and this goes back to Derry. I mean, when Derry were in rag order only a few weeks ago, they were down key bodies in that middle 8, and Hart was disrupting his midfield duo as well. At one stage, I think Brendan Rodgers went back to centre back because literally he had an entire half back line wiped out. But at the weekend, you had Conor Doherty back. He's had injury issues. Garrett McKinless back from his 2-match suspension. And Owen McAvoy was playing as well. So, an awful lot of the bodies in the middle third, their key men are back. Derry's kind of lack of strength and depth became a big issue just a few matches ago when the bodies were down. But McKinless was very, very influential at the weekend. May have missed a few chances, got a point, but he was the guy, I think, who won the rebound when Glass's shot came off the post. But he was also still involved a couple of passes later, slipping that ball under huge pressure to Chrissy McCaig for the equaliser. And but for that, Derry were gone, and we'd be talking about, Kerry v Mayo probably this weekend. So, it's. I think it's going to be a proper test for Kerry, and it's going to be maybe even more of a test because we're not too sure, are they going to be able to kind of slip seamlessly through the gears? They've looked impressive up to here without being fully tested, and not necessarily in recent times, but historically going back previous regimes when Jack O'Connor was involved, sometimes Kerry were at their most vulnerable going into what you call the All-Ireland, the old All-Ireland quarterfinal stage, when they'd have coasted through Munster and everyone thought they're fine, but suddenly they were hit by a serious test in Croke Park, and they didn't always have the answers. So I think it's a fascinating clash.
Yeah, Frank or Dick, rather. Do you expect Kerry to be Croke Park ready? This weekend. Do you expect them to be kind of where they would want to be at this stage, or will that lack of a test, manifest itself in maybe, as Frank said, a performance that maybe doesn't go seamlessly up the gears?
What does Croke Park ready mean? Like, every team has weaknesses. The likes of Derry and different teams, they've got exposed at different times, and they've a chance to rectify them or make position changes. Kerry at this stage really probably don't know where this team in 2024 where they really are weak against the top teams. Bar taking a few snapshots from the league. Again, the complete no-show against, say, the first half against Dublin in the league, that showed a serious weakness in midfield. You'd beg the question, have they fixed that? I don't think they have. Personnel aren't any different. So we don't know until they actually go up against a real good team in Croke Park at a top pitch, at a top pace game, whether that midfield is up to it. They're going to find that out this weekend. It was one of the areas that Derry was very strong against Kerry last year. Like, if you remember, Brenton Rodgers was absolutely phenomenal in that semi-final game last year. So the Derry players are lining up against the Kerry players with absolutely no fear or inhibitions, because they matched them all the way last year, bar one player, David Clifford, and we'll come to him in a minute. Mickey Hart is going up with absolutely no fear or inhibitions against Kerry tactically. So if there's any matchups, if there's any jobs have to be done to target perceived Kerry weaknesses, there's few better managers than Mickey Hart based on his proven record doing it. So these are all massive positives in Derry's. Kerry have really no choice but to go up with what they've been doing to date, which has obviously been good enough to beat second, third tier teams. There's a level of unpredictability which no manager sort of likes. Where is the form? As you say, probably caught Mayo. Like, they were looking at Shane McGuigan, they were looking at everything. And next thing, young Murray pops up with a out-of-this-world performance. So that's another head-scratcher for Jack O'Connor. I think it's a really intriguing game. I think the Kerry players and management would be not happy with this draw at all. But if they can come out of it, it's a great one in terms of what comes down of it. So I guess it's without doubt for me the draw of the weekend, and I'm certainly looking forward to it.
Yeah, just to round off this portion of the discussion, Frank, just to kind of finish up on Mayo, how do you reflect on their championship as a whole? They had kind of three big games. They lost to Galway by a point in the Connacht final, despite leading going into injury time. The Dublin game last weekend, obviously that great score by Dublin to rescue that, which obviously has proved majorly significant with how everything has played out subsequently. And then obviously last weekend, losing on penalties, that late Chrissy McCaig point that was mentioned, kind of tripping them up there as well. It could be so different if a few small things went against them. I obviously know Dick mentioned that it was kind of their own undoing in many ways, but still very, very narrow margins.
Yeah, I know. I think Charlotte Burns on the radio this morning, when the draw has been made, he was reflecting on how Mayo had found a new way to lose another heartbreaking game. They'd done everything bar lose a penalty shootout. I think overall it has to be viewed as a kind of disappointing Mayo season. I mean, it's only the second time since 2011 that they've failed to reach the All-Ireland quarter-final stage. The only previous occasion was the famous Newbridge or nowhere defeat to Kildare in 2018. But I think as much as anything, it's maybe how they've gone out. And there will, of course, there's going to be a huge discussion about the fact that they haven't closed out 3 matches that were there for the taking in injury time. And they've paid, as we've now seen, they've paid a really huge price for stopping that Cormac Costello equaliser by hook or by crook in the dying seconds in Hyde Park, and it kind of called to mind how, I think it was the 2017 All-Ireland final after Dean Rocket put Dublin ahead. Suddenly, from the next kick-out, there was 3 Mayo forwards suddenly, miraculously, on the ground, or halfbacks on the ground as Mayo were trying to get the kick-out away. Dublin kind of knew how to close that game out, and some people might have liked it, but they knew how to do it. Mayo didn't against Dublin. But I think in a way it's an even bigger issue in that they're just too inconsistent in matches. And whether that's down to skill set or how they set up as a team, I'm not 100% sure. But we had in the first half there the other night, where, going 13 minutes, 20 odd minutes in the first half on another occasion without scoring, and not even necessarily looking like they were going to score. They weren't hitting a load of wides. They were just struggling to break down a team. And then suddenly they catch fire for 10 minutes and they go ahead. And then they don't press on from there again. So I think that's a big issue with the team. They're playing in little bursts. They look great for a while. They did against Roscommon. They had that game done and dusted. And then suddenly it's panic stations in injury time, where Roscommon might have got a late goal to get something out of the game. So I think it's, there's going to be more scrutiny on Kevin McStay and Stephen Rochford next season. They're going into year 3. They won a league in the first season. They haven't won a Connacht title. And I know that Connacht titles aren't what Mayo are after. It's something much bigger. But looking at the moment, they're no closer to winning an All-Ireland. And Aidan O'Shea has actually produced 2 of his best performances back-to-back in the last 2 weeks. He was taken off late on again there at the weekend, and some Mayo fans are grumbling, should we have done that? Was he really spent? Did we need more leaders on the pitch to close out the game in normal time? And that's when it wasn't even in extra time. It wasn't in the penalty shootout, where Mayo lost that game really ultimately on Saturday night, was in the closing minutes of normal time, in injury time. They should have gone 2 points ahead. Sam Callanan fisted a good chance wide, and that left the window open for Derry.
There's certainly plenty to reflect on for them as they go into the off-season. Dick, we also have Dublin versus Galway, another kind of intriguing game this weekend. Obviously the All-Ireland champions versus the finalists in 2022, and Galway overcame your County Monaghan. Maybe an end of an era kind of feel potentially with Conor McManus. It looks possibly like he's going to be retiring. How do you reflect on that game on Saturday?
Yeah, listen, sort of mixed emotions. Very proud of the way that they went down, still sort of battling with injuries and short a few key men that they really needed to have a chance of winning that game. But they competed really well. It was one of those games, I'd say, Galway, and they seen the weather turning and a dirty day and got off to a bad start. It was like, oh, here we go. Here's a dogfight, and that's sometimes those games. Form, everything goes out the window. You just want to get out of there with a win. And from a Galway perspective, they did that. There was nothing impressive. They're not any further up the ratings in terms of All Irelands, and they're not any further back. It was just one of those types of games. Shane Walsh had to come off early. I haven't heard much whether it was that a bad injury, was a precautionary. Maybe Frank, you have. Damien Comer came back on, had an impact. So listen, Galway will be just delighted. Big performances from the likes of Maher and Paul Conroy. So they're now, they haven't been rewarded too well with Dublin. I think that's going to be an extremely difficult task for them. Back to Monaghan, listen, just very proud. It was a very difficult year here. It's been very frustrating considering obviously we were in All-Ireland semi-final last year and come from those heights to sort of it wasn't. Listen, sport owes you nothing, but when you've done so well for so long for manager like Vinny and players like Conor and Carl O'Connell to have to endure that season, and it was luckless in many ways. But at least they sort of went out, a day with their boots on, or whatever way you want to say it, on Saturday. Obviously, Connor's kind of going to move on now. He didn't want to say it to sort of maybe make it all about him, but there's no realistic chance of him coming back. And listen, he could have easily went out last year on the highs of an All-Ireland semi-final. He could have went out a couple of years before that. He'd any amount of opportunities, such as the service and where his body's at, but he kept going to the bitter end to try and give as much as he could to Vinny and those set of boys. I'd make reference to my column at the scoring tomorrow, like he'll go down as Monaghan's best ever. I think he's been the best ball striker, if you want to call it that, of his generation. I think his portfolio of work and scoring, like, sometimes was taken for granted as a Monaghan player and a Monaghan supporter. But when you look back at some of his performances against the best teams in the biggest arenas, there's few have a better resume. Certainly a Mayo, for instance. You look at a Mayo, if Conor McManus had been from Mayo, they probably have 2 or 3 All-Irelands at this stage. And such is the importance and the value of a player like him, like Monaghan. I've my medals to thank for Conor. Monaghan's success over the last 15 years, there's no single player has had a bigger impact to that. Yes, we talk about the team ethos and all the rest, but such an impactful player, clutch player. The amount of scores he hit in big games, God, where do you start? So listen, I was delighted that he went off. He was on the pitch, he scored. Yes, it wasn't in victory, but you rarely finish your careers winning unless you go to the very, very top. So I think it was, he would have liked to go out on maybe a better note, but I guess the way, like, most careers finish on a bit of a down, but when he looks back, it's certainly be anything but that.
Yeah, some sensational career, as you said. And there was that goal chance in the second half that came off the crossbar. If that goes in, who knows? Monaghan could be playing this weekend, and Galway might be having their season ended. Frank, from a Galway perspective, heading into the Dublin game, Dick touched on it there. They get Damien Comer back, but then Shane Walsh is withdrawn. It's the injury luck or lack of it that they've had this year has been significant. Can they produce a performance capable of beating Dublin with all these injury question marks, you think?
I'm not too sure. It's so typical. I was doing a piece for Saturday's paper on the importance of Walsh and Comer as a duo for Galway as it gets to the squeaky bum time of the season. And, at that stage, Comer had just been named in the subs. There was a question mark still locally. Are they going to risk him? Will they need to bring him on? And I'd been up in Markovich Park the week before, where Walsh had shown some flashes in the first half, 2 really good points from play, which he has been doing in recent weeks. But he was also at one stage getting treatment on his leg or ankle on the touchline during that first half. And there were whispers beforehand that there was a potential injury issue there. Now, I was up in Omagh on Saturday trying to follow a bit of the first half on my Jago on the laptop, and I could see Walsh going off. I didn't know I couldn't quite see what the issue was, but reading some Pádraig Joyce quotes this morning, it seems like maybe it is the ankle. I thought initially maybe it was hamstring, and at that stage, sure, if it's hamstring, he will be gone, So whether they can get him right for the weekend, I don't know. Damien Comer got 25 minutes there on Saturday, kicked a good point, set up another one. So, it's absolutely vital that Galway get him back. How much is he going to be able to produce? And against Dublin, this is the other thing. We're going into Croke Park. That pitch will find out injured players very quickly, or players who aren't fully back up to match speed. And not for the first time, Damien's had a really disrupted season. He missed the entire league, came back against Sligo, turned that game, was brilliant in the Connacht final, then did his hamstring against Derry. So that's the big issue for Galway. Will they be able to score enough against Dublin? In fairness, defensively, their record this summer is up there with the best. They've played 7 championship matches. They're unbeaten. They've won all bar one where they drew at Armagh, and that was the only game where they conceded a goal, and that was a bit of a gift, from a kick out. So they've been getting lots of things right, but I just have a question mark over whether they're going to be able to punish Dublin enough, really. At the other end, they need a flying fit Walsh and Comer. They need Rob Finnerty chipping in. Paul Conroy was huge at the weekend. Kicked 3 big points from a few of them from distance, but they're not going to be able to. They can't be relying on Conroy to bail them out every game either. Like, he's 35, I think, at this stage.
Dick, what's your perspective on the Dublin-Galway game?
Like, I've been a big fan of Galway. I think in many ways they have the attributes, but I think just the timing of this game, I think they would have benefited of getting through maybe an easier route in Croke Park to get those players back another 10, 15, 20% fitter before having to take on one of the big hitters like Kerry or Dublin. I just think this game is going to come too soon for them. I think there's too many question marks over the fitness of those players that they need to be beating the likes of Dublin and Croke Park. And I think Dublin as well, there'll be no complacency there. They'll not want to follow up a sort of mediocre performance by their standards like they had against Mayo. So you can expect them to come out all goal displays, and I think that just could be too much to bear for Galway. I hope not. I hope the game doesn't get away from. I hope it's competitive, but they're going to need huge performances again from the likes of Conroy and Maher around the middle. Like, Fenton was well marshalled against Mayo. It's not often he has 2 poor games in a row. So I think it's going to be a huge ask. That defence of Galway's that Frank has talked about, been so good. They're not going to have experienced anything like these Dublin forwards and that sort of combined effort. Not just the first 6, the next sort of 3 or 4 that might come into us. So it's going to be a huge ask for Galway because of the injuries. But listen, that's when you get up at this stage of the championship, the air gets that wee bit thinner. You can't be looking for handy draws. You have to beat what's in front of you, or you have to compete what's there. I think it's on paper, there's a bit of a traditional old school blue-blooded feel about it. My fear this one could get away from Galway if they get off to a bad start. That's my only fear, because of all the games, there is that potential in this one this weekend. Hopefully not, because I do like Galway. I do like what Pádraig Joyce has done with them, but I just think there's just a few too many question marks there with the injuries that they have, and then hitting the Dublin team that'll really want to, put their hands up and sort of dispel any notions that they're actually not the best team after that Mayo performance. That they'll be coming, back in Croke Park, back in championship conditions. That's a dangerous proposition for Galway.
Yeah, I think everyone will be eagerly awaiting kind of any late changes to the Galway team before throwing to see who's actually fit and who's actually available for that one. Frank, you mentioned you were at Healy Park for Tyrone Roscommon. One of the results of the season in some ways. I don't think Roscommon were that well mapped to go up to Tyrone and get a victory. Like, what stood out to you about how they went about their business and what was a great day for Davy Burke, probably the highlight of his tenure to date?
Well, the first half was, I think, definitely the high point of Burke's 2 years with Roscommon, because everything about they're away from home, they're travelling up to Armagh, their form for most of the year has been quite poor now. Let's call a spade a spade. They'd beaten Cavan the week before in a bit of a shootout, but that was their first win in 16 weeks, and only their second win all season in league and championship. But they were really, really on it in the first half. I mean, it was a mixture of defending really tenaciously, closing out the spaces around the D whenever Tyrone tried to penetrate there, forcing turnovers, and then counter-attacking at great pace. Not just using their hands and foot passing to great effect. And like the first wide they hit in the first half didn't come until injury time. I mean, some of their scores by Diarmuid Murtagh, Dara Craig, Donny Smith. I mean, it was really top drawer finishing. And in fairness, they saw a lot less of the ball in the second half. They were playing into the wind, and Tyrone, they emptied the bench, which they had to, and they stepped up their performance a lot. It couldn't have been any worse. But Roscommon kept chipping away. Every 5 or 6 minutes they'd go on a counter attack, and one of those trio would score, a really good point again. So they have some really, they've some very talented forwards, but they got the whole game plan together probably for the first time in a long time at the weekend. The one big caveat is Tyrone. Tyrone, the first half were awful, and it's hard to fathom how far they have fallen from the highs of 2021. I know people say that was a kind of almost an outlier of an All-Ireland win. It kind of came from nowhere, but they've gone back in the other direction, very quickly. Tyrone have been far too inconsistent all year, and they paid the price at the weekend.
Yeah, Dick, I'd just be interested to get your thoughts on Tyrone. Obviously, you know them very well up there. As Frank mentioned there, like it's funny, like you look at Dooher and Logan's tenure over a 4-year period, and obviously winning an All Ireland that's what you want to do when you come in as a manager. But besides that, it's been like the lows have been a lot lower than say Mickey Hart's the last couple of years, where there was a lot of grumblings about what he was doing with them. And I know they won the All Ireland, which gives them a free pass, but 3 years on, 3 seasons on, and there's not a lot to show for it. Like, is it kind of the end of that era, do you think, now?
I think there is a bit. There's a lot of new personnel this year that were sort of trying to nail down a jersey and make an impact. And at different times, they did show glimpses. Like Dara Calvin probably still is, if you were to name the best 6 forwards of the football calendar thus far, he'd be up there. But the more the season went on, the more obvious that he was almost carrying them on their back. Like you could see in the dying stages of the game at the weekend, like he was literally like his father did before him, trying to take on whole defences and nearly did at times. But there was nobody else, and that's the really disappointing thing from the Tyrone players. There was nobody else really there that was willing to shoulder the burden. Like you have players like Cathal McShane who just falling off the planet, and this happens. Players get injuries, they lose form, and it's you see a name, you see them on the team sheet, and you think, oh, he's there, and you're going back to a time that they were, winning All-Stars, winning All-Irelands, and the player that's out on the pitch bears no resemblance to that. And I think that's probably been Tyrone's frustration, that players with All-Ireland medals, with All-Stars and awards like that, just have been a pale comparison to those players. And that game, it smacked of a couple of things, probably a bit of complacency, which Tyrone have always had, but it took a team to come up and recognise that and to go at it. Like plenty of teams would have gone up to Omagh or come up north and didn't sort of any belief and didn't really have a proper cut. They might go conservative and we'll keep it tight. We don't want to get sort of skinned in the early stages. Roscommon, in fairness to them, went out and said, the hell with that, we're going to have a go here. We're going to back ourselves. We're good strikers of the ball. They can all score from distance. If there's a blanket defence here, we're going to kick over it, and they've done that. And look, fortune's the brave. And fair play to them. It was a big result for them, but they just got thrown at the right time because they were a sort of an average team that at different times played above themselves. And Roscommon delivered a performance that was great. So it was a massive thing for them. I have family in Roscommon. They'll be getting planned for the weekend up to and have a good draw as well. So that's the other side to it now. Look at the teams. Derry, Armagh, Roscommon, Louth, Donegal. Two of those teams now are going to be in All-Ireland semi-final. So massive opportunity. But it just shows you when you go out, you play positively, you back yourself. Instead of passing it left or right, you back yourself like those forwards that Frank Roche said. Donny Smith, Dara Craig, Ger Murta, back yourself. You see what it gets you. How many other teams do we see? How many Mayo players, and not to be unfair again to Mayo because we sort of give them a kick. How many players in Castlebar on Saturday evening were in the positions that the Roscommon players were, and instead of backing themselves and going for the score, they passed it left, they passed it right, they passed it back. That's what Gaelic football is. It's good to see teams like Roscommon, getting their reward for playing that with that positivity.
Yeah, and Frank, as Dick mentioned, like Armagh and Roscommon now playing in that quarter-final, like, I don't think Armagh have been in an All-Ireland semi-final since 2005, if I'm not mistaken. I was just having to think about it there before I asked you that question. Could have missed out a year, but I don't think I have. So going back a long time in Roscommon, even longer again. So the prize is great, but Armagh, having rebounded well from that Ulster final defeat, it does seem like they could be primed for a big end of season potentially.
They could be, but I mean, as I look at the 4 quarterfinals, and if there is to be an upset, part of me is thinking that this is the most likely one for it to happen. Now, I don't want to get carried away with Roscommon on the back of, finally hitting form in the 3rd week in June, where they've suddenly won back-to-back matches. And, they have fallen back quickly enough over the years as well without overstepping or over-egging what they've done. But Armagh still have it all to prove at this level. They've lost 2 All-Ireland quarterfinals in a row, both on penalties, and we can say, the huge level of kind of misfortune attached to that. They haven't, I think, lost a championship match in 70 minutes in a long time. But on the flip side of that is they haven't finished off enough of these matches either, and they left Monaghan kind of in the game for long enough 12 months ago when people were expecting them. Why aren't they pushing on here in the second half? And they didn't, and Monaghan found a way to win that game. So Armagh have to be very, very careful going in here, I think. It's if they play to form, they should win it. But I was up watching them against Galway there 8 days ago, and for long stretches of that game in Markievicz Park, they were struggling. Bar a couple of, Rian O'Neill was good that day, Turbot was good. But, they were 5 points down, and deservedly 5 points down with probably 15 minutes to go, and then caught fire. We don't see enough of that for long enough in these matches from Armagh. But, they're favourites, and rightly favourites going in this weekend.
They'll not be by much, Frank. As you say, that they haven't enough done, and God knows I've been quick enough to call that out. But, there's not enough there to say that, looking at that fixture, that I would put, how much of your own money would you put on Armagh to win that? Not much. They should win it. They're marginally favourites, but what a draw for Roscommon. What an opportunity. You get to this stage, Jesus, I think that the times when Monaghan, we got this far, next thing we drew Kerry, Dublin, a Tyrone at their best. You're like, what do you do for a nicer draw or more favourable draw to try and get to a semi-final or a final? It's a great draw for Roscommon. They've absolutely nothing to lose. I would even say that'd be completely disparaging to say they're in bonus territory, because they'll be looking at that, because Roscommon, even though they mightn't have the medals, or they're a confident county. They do not lack in belief, and rightly in Roscommon, they are going up to win that game. And having beaten Tyrone in Healy Park, I don't care. You can say what you like about Tyrone. Not too many teams do that. Roscommon beating an Ulster team. What better preparation could you need than going into that game? So I think second to Kerry and Derry. That's for me. It's the tie of the weekend.
And I think I did a quick head count there. I think Armagh have lost 6 quarterfinals in a row since they last won one in 2005. So this record, or this kind of stage, has not been kind to them over the last couple of years. So it sets it up nicely. And then the final quarterfinal, we have Louth versus Donegal. As I mentioned at the top of the show, new territory for Louth after beating Cork in a bit of a dogfight yesterday afternoon. And Frank, it's been one of the stories of the season. Obviously, after Mickey Hart left at the end of the year to go to Derry, a lot of people thought maybe that would be the end of Louth's resurgence, but not only that, Ger Brennan has taken them on another step. They were quite competitive with Dublin in the Leinster final, and now they're into a quarter-final where they play Donegal again, a game which they'll go in with believing they can win.
Yeah, well, I think nearly if you were to pick your football manager of the year at this stage, which you never do, Ger Brennan would be very, very close to winning it. It's his first season as a senior inter-county manager, and he has done an absolutely brilliant job with Louth. Even if you measure, they solidified in Division 2 when it could have gone badly wrong for them, with the change of manager, the way they lost heart, everything about that. They kept their place. They not just got to a Leinster final again, but came with a plan, a very pragmatic, but very, for the most part, effective plan against Dublin, and only lost by 4 points, where they'd lost by 21 points the year before. They were well beaten by Kerry a week ago, but the margin was still, I think, halved compared to what it had been 12 months ago. So I must admit, going into ahead of this game yesterday, and I watched it all on GA Go, part of me was thinking, I think Louth can win this. And I was kind of surprised by everyone was talking about Cork being warm favourites. And I was like, I'd seen Cork the week before against Tyrone, and second half they were very, very poor. And I thought if Louth can just kind of believe in themselves, and there's no reason why they wouldn't, playing in Inniskeen, they're adopted home from home, but the place is going to be full of Louth people, that they could go on and win it. Now, it was a struggle, and they didn't play well in the first half, and the game could have got away from them. At that stage, we're facing into the wind in the second half, goal down. But, I think fair play to them. I thought it was a really gutsy performance. And, in a way, again, they've got a free shot this weekend as well. Donegal will be favourites, rightfully so, given their form for almost the entire year. But, Donegal lost to Cork a few weeks ago. They probably got the timing of that blip perfect as it turned out. But Donegal have to come totally focused into this match, and you can be sure as hell that Ger Brennan will have a plan. He will have figured out a plan. What is our best way of staying in the game for long enough against Donegal? Whether it works out, time will tell.
Yeah, Dick, how do you think Donegal are set? Like, obviously, earlier in the season, they were kind of the story of the championship. Things have moved on a bit now, but they're back in Croke Park where they want to be. They have the rest week to kind of build up to this game, and they got what is probably the kind of straw they could have gotten. Are they primed for a real assault, or can't allow maybe be swinging upset?
Well, the cards are all falling very nicely for Donegal. Like, all the conversation over the last 3 or 4 weeks has been about everybody but Donegal. Ever since they had that big win in Ulster, they've sort of just gone about their business. Even the defeat against Cork, because there was very little footage to capture, it got really no coverage, so they got away with that. They've been able to use that, take it back up to Donegal, and make sure whatever happened there doesn't repeat itself. And we've seen that to ruthless effect against Clare. They've got the draw that you'd handpicked. Let's be honest, and not been unfair to Louth. They would have handpicked that themselves. So what more can Jimmy McGuinness ask for? They should be winning this game. They're not hiding to nothing, because Louth are a good team. I seen Louth against Monaghan. I was impressed with them. I think they have some really good, strong, physical players where you need them down the middle, like Christy Grimes, Samuel Roy, Tommy Dornan. So they'll need that against Donegal, who are physical down the middle. Listen, I think the exertions of the Cork game and just Donegal have probably had a nice, handy run in many ways over the last couple of weeks. Donegal will be fresher. Like, McGuinness will know, whatever about other managers that we've talked about don't know when there's the right time to step it up and bring in. I'm expecting Donegal to go at this full pace. Like, they will come at Louth absolutely relentlessly. He will not want this to get into a dogfight. He'll not step off and try and be cagey. So I expect, don't be surprised if you see Donegal up by 5 or 6 points plus at half time. Like they did against Clare. They went down there and said, listen, boys, put these boys away. Just get our job, get our work done and get back up the road. I think he'll be adopting. So it'll be up to Louth to stay in that game, get it to the last quarter. That's Ger Brennan's challenge now. He'll not know where the energy is after the tough few weeks they had until he gets onto the pitch. So he'll find a way to stay in the game. Samuel Roy, he's probably the best free taker there is out there. Any opportunities that he gets, he need to nail them and get it to the last quarter, because that's their only hope. If it opens up, Donegal, because of the energy and the way that they play, could blow them away fairly quickly, but hopefully not. Louth don't deserve to be going down there to get a hide, and they've done too much. They've brought too much colour and excitement to the championship so far this year. So I'm really hoping that it's a really good competitive game and it goes to the wire.
Yeah, just one thing to add from a Cork perspective, in their 5 championship games before Sunday, they'd averaged 17.5 points, and that's against games against Kerry, including Tyrone, Donegal, so some good teams in there. They only got 1-8 against Louth and only 3 points in the second half. So that's substantially down from what they've managed in the championship this summer. So that was probably ultimately their undoing. Guys, we might finish off with some predictions then. I know we've kind of chatted through some games, and my excitement is definitely high now going into what feels like a really big weekend. Frank, I'll go to you first. Who do you think will win across the 4 matches we have to look forward to in Croke Park this weekend?
I'm looking at the 4. The 2 I'm kind of most uncertain about would be Armagh v Roscommon and Kerry v Derry, but I still would have to lean towards the favourites in the 2 of them. Armagh to beat Roscommon, but it wouldn't surprise me remotely if they find themselves in 1 or 2 pickles during the game, because they have a great habit of ending up in those spots as well. If Kerry are right, and if they don't kind of go into battle kind of not ready for what this is going to be a tough ask. Derry have got their defensive shape back in place. I don't think they're going to cough up the ridiculous goals they were doing earlier in the summer, but Kerry should still be good enough to win that. You've got to remember that Derry were that close to being knocked out by a Mayo team that performed in fits and starts at the weekend. So if Kerry are right, I think Kerry will win it. I think the issues of injury and match timing and all that will probably catch up on Galway against Dublin. And probably the one I'd be most convinced about is I think Donegal will beat Louth.
And I think if all the 4 favourites to win, I'm right in saying that Armagh and Donegal can't meet in an All-Ireland semi-final because they played in the Ulster final. So that would mean Dublin and Kerry also couldn't meet in a semi-final. So if the 4 favourites do win, it's kind of Dublin and Kerry on opposite sides of the draw, I believe. Frank, am I correct in saying that?
You would be. That means it'll be an Armagh Donegal All-Ireland final, I think. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe, yeah. Who knows? But we've a long way to get to that stage first. Dick, I'll give you the last word then. Who do you think will come out of the 4 matches?
Armagh, Dublin, Donegal and Derry. I'm going to go one against the head. It's too safe and too obvious here. Who's going to listen to us predicting all the winners? Let's be honest. If nothing else, just to piss a certain person off, I'm going to go with Derry. But listen, I think they're trending in the right direction at the right time. Listen, there's a backstory there that could be books written about. But I think at this point in time, like, they've beaten Kerry already this year in the league, so they'll have no fear. Sometimes when Monaghan, I think back, like you made reference, Frank, about teams getting to Croke Park and getting the opportunity to beat a big team, but you just don't do enough. Sometimes there's a bit of belief. Have you beaten that team before? Have you gone to the wire in the league or championship game before? Mickey Hart was criticised in many ways about putting out his best hand against Kerry in Tralee in January or February, where it was. Now that's coming back to be seen as potentially, depending on how the result goes, as a masterstroke, because that builds confidence. They've beaten Kerry, they've stood up side by side and they've dominated them. Doesn't matter when it was, you got to do it first. Now they've got to do it again in championship football at the right time of the year. I think I'm just not convinced with Kerry. I think, and we've been looking for reasons to mark them down. I think David Clifford's form has to be a concern. He was the single reason why they beat Derry last year. I think Kerry will see that as a vulnerability. They'll be sort of saying, well, is Chrissy McCaig, I'm not sure where he is at with fitness. Have they got the man to mark him down? I think that could be a deciding factor. I think that's going to determine the game. If David Clifford doesn't find the form of last year, which he hasn't to date, I think Derry win this game. No, could be wrong. They could do them by 10 points like they have done every other team. But I think if there's going to be an upset, I struggle to see it elsewhere. I think Derry have an opportunity there because, their season was gone. It was gone. It was in tatters, careers, reputations, everything. And there was an inquest in Derry. And now they're back where they wanted to be. They're back where they set out at the start of the year. Top team, Croke Park, All-Ireland title still within their grasp. And as you say, if they get over that, they don't hit Dublin till the final. So I think if that's not motivation for that group of players to get their best performance of the year, what more do they need?
Well, it's set up to be a very exciting weekend in Croke Park this coming weekend. In the meantime, I'd like to thank Dick and Frank for joining me on this week's episode of the Tyrone Football Podcast. We will be back next week with another show reflecting on those 4 quarter-final ties. In the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks so much for listening and goodbye.